Cap Times Idea Fest 2020 is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors. Presenting sponsor, the Burrish Group at UBS, a financial services firm with global access and a local focus to pursue what matters most for its clients. Major sponsors are HealthX Ventures, backing entrepreneurs who are creating value with digital health solutions. Exact Sciences, pursuing earlier detections and life-changing answers in the fight against cancer. Quartz, health plans built with you in mind. And Madison Gas and Electric, your community energy company whose goal is net zero carbon electricity by 2050. Co-sponsors are Epic Systems and the Godfrey Kahn Law Firm. Other sponsors are Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, Home Savings Bank, Unity Point Health Meritor, Cargo Coffee, and the Forward Theater Company. Media partners are the Wisconsin State Journal and Madison.com, WKOW Channel 27, and Hinckley Productions. Please consider becoming a Cap Times member. Learn more at membership.captimes.com.
Hello, I'm Paul Fanland, editor and publisher of the Capital Times, and I'd like to welcome you to the first session of Cap Times Idea Fest featuring former Attorney General Eric Holder. This is our fourth annual event, but the first that we are presenting virtually. Our theme this year is 2020 Changes Everything. Given the local and regional impact of COVID-19, the resulting economic damage, and the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement, there's a lot to talk about. We think this year's lineup is our best yet. We believe IdeaFest has grown into a signature event on the Madison calendar. It is also an important showcase for the Capital Times, our locally owned and century-old journalism brand. If you're not already, we hope you'll consider becoming a Cap Times member. As a member, you'll have access to special IdeaFest programs plus benefits throughout the year. You'll also be supporting an independent, trustworthy local media source at a time when that has never been more important. Learn more at membership.captimes.com. I'd also like to thank the Burrish Group at UBS, which is the presenting sponsor of IdeaFest and has been with us since the start. Andy Burrish and Jason Moss have built their asset management firm's stellar reputation by effective investing for Madisonians, but also for investing in Madison. Their generous support of IdeaFest is but one example of their community commitment. The Burrish Group is also session sponsor of 5 individual sessions over the next 2 weeks, including tonight's with Eric Holder. Again, thank you and welcome.
Well, hello, Attorney General Holder. Thank you so much for being here virtually. Wish we could have you here in Madison, but appreciate you making the time to join us from afar.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I wish I could be in Madison as well. My daughter graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison this past year, so I'm pretty familiar with what's a really nice city.
Excellent. Yeah, it's a great school, a great city. Well, hopefully we'll be able to get you back here in person one of these days. But we're obviously in some strange times. So how have you been managing and getting through the pandemic times?
You know, it's interesting, Jessie. I mean, there was a time, I guess, at the beginning, I guess back in March, where it was almost like I was on vacation, but work has picked up, and I just do the normal things that I have been doing. I just do them from my basement. I do them from home. I miss traveling. I miss being on the road, and I certainly miss the campaigning that I was looking forward to. October and September in anticipation of the election in November. That part I miss, not being able to do live events.
Yeah, that's got to be a big change for everyone who's used to being on the trail. And we're here to talk mostly about Wisconsin, but there's certainly a lot going on nationally that I think people will be interested in hearing from you about as well. Most notably, probably the recent death of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. What are your memories of her, and what do you sort of see as her legacy in the judicial field?
Well, I think what people have to understand about Ruth Bader Ginsburg is that she was a legal giant and would have been considered as such even if she never served a day on the United States Supreme Court. She, like Thurgood Marshall, was a preeminent civil rights lawyer. Thurgood Marshall made the United States better and more fair for African Americans. Ruth Bader Ginsburg did the same thing for women. And then when you put on top of that great career, her service on the United States Supreme Court, you're talking about a true titan of American law. I first came to know of her when I was in law school and she was teaching at Columbia Law School. She was always a person with a wry sense of humor, always very precise in her language, and always extremely well prepared. The nation is going to miss her. We are really going to miss RBG.
It does seem likely that the Senate is going to hold a vote on a nominee to fill her seat. I've heard you speak about this recently, and you've said this would give the court an illegitimate majority. Could you expand on that and why you think this is the wrong move right now?
Well, I think we should first understand this is not a question of McConnell coming up with principles, one party, same party, timing, and all that. This is just an exercise of raw power. And that is what happened also with Merrick Garland. That was just an exercise of raw power. And I think what has happened here is that the use of that power by the Republicans, by Mitch McConnell, has been inappropriate and has resulted in illegitimate appointments to the court. Merrick Garland clearly should have gotten a hearing and a vote. He was about 9-10. We were about 9-10 months away from the election. This time, voting has already started with regard to the 2020 presidential election, and it seems to me the time is too short for us to be putting a person up to replace Justice Ginsburg. So you will have, after this is over, presumably the person will be nominated and confirmed, a court that will stand 6-3. I have said, and I stand by it, that I think that that if Joe Biden wins and if there is a Democratic Senate, that the power that they have should be used to engage in court reform, and serious consideration needs to be given to expanding the court. That, I think, is a use of power, but I think it is a legitimate use of power.
Do you fear at all that could backfire against voters who are used to seeing the court as the number that it is? This is an institution that we've all sort of grown up recognizing in a certain way. Do you think people might be reluctant to see such a change like that?
Yeah, there will be some initial reluctance, I suppose. People become comfortable with the familiar. The history of the court shows that during the 19th century, the number of justices who served, went up and down. But you can't ignore the fact that you could have in place a 6-3 majority on the court. Now, if that happened, if it just happened in an appropriate way, people retired, people died, and that would be fine. But what happened here is the Republicans and Mitch McConnell, again, used that power that they had to circumvent normal processes and to put in place a conservative majority that should not otherwise be there. And given the stakes with regard to, everything from reproductive rights to climate, to healthcare, the Affordable Care Act is something that is being considered by the court in oral arguments that will be heard in the middle of November. I mean, given the stakes, what we know now and what we will see over the next 10, 20, 30 years, I don't think that we should, be slaves to the familiar. I think we want to make sure that we have a system and a court that is constructed in a fair way.
Sure. You just mentioned a few issues, particularly the Affordable Care Act. What would be your greatest concerns in terms of potential changes that could come if the court does end up with that 6-3 conservative majority?
Well, certainly in the short term, the fate of the Affordable Care Act is clearly at stake, and people with pre-existing conditions, their health is at stake. So there's that. Concerns also about the protection of voting rights, the question of climate, criminal justice reform. There's a whole range of things that I focus on right now that I'm very concerned about. But there also are these things, 10, 20, 30 years down the road that we can't speculate about. And yet what I see is that Mitch McConnell has put in place an ideological majority on the court that I suspect will not respond in a way that is consistent with the desires of the American people. I mean, I think that's what people have to understand here. We have a court that represents a minority view, minority positions of people in the United States. Now, the court doesn't have to be, swayed by public opinion, and yet the court needs to be in tune, in step, in some ways, with the American people. And a 6-3 conservative, ideologically conservative majority is not in step with the American people.
You've been involved also at court races kind of up and down the levels, certainly state Supreme Court here in Wisconsin. And it does feel that, of course, since we do elect our judges, there's a potential for that politicization in the first place. But it does feel like there's been an overall politicization of courts throughout the country. What do you think that says about people's faith in the judiciary at this point? And do you think, I guess, where do you think that we can go from here to restore maybe some of the faith that's been lost?
That's a really good question. And I think we need to step back. Politicians need to step back. The courts are one of the few institutions that we have left in American society that I think people generally have, a degree of faith and confidence in. And that's because courts are perceived to be, as they should be, fairly neutral and detached. And so I think we need to step back. One of the ideas that I've seen that I like is to limit the terms of Supreme Court justices, United States Supreme Court justices, to 18 years, have them serve in staggered terms so that every president in his or her first year and third year would appoint a justice. And if you did it that way, that would really kind of, I think, lower the temperature, lower the stakes of any single appointment, and would also maintain some degree of ideological balance. And bring fresh blood onto the court in an ordered way. I worry about states where justices are elected. I mean, I understand that is the choice of the people and the governments in the states. But I worry that we get into a situation where the selection of judges through election becomes politicized. And yet, I was here, campaigning for and supporting two of the justices who now serve on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. But I thought I had to do that, given the fact that their opponents were getting substantial amounts of support from special interests.
Sure. Moving away from the courts to the election in general, we've got President Trump now saying that if Joe Biden does win on November 3rd, he won't commit to a peaceful transition of power. What do you have to say about that? What does that say about the state of our democracy?
This should give everybody great concern. The fact that a candidate cannot say something as simple as, if defeated, there will be a peaceful transition of power. I mean, that is what you would expect from anybody who is running for president of the United States. And it is what we have seen with regard to every person who was defeated. It's what this nation has seen since 1792. And the fact that this president is unable to say that should give us great concern. He is not tied, it seems, to our traditions, our democratic traditions. And as always, it's always about him. It's never about our systems, our norms, our democracy. And if there was, one more reason to say that he is unfit to be president, this would certainly be one of those things. I'm very disturbed by that. And my expectation would be that we'll hear a lot of Republicans come out and say that what the president did not say was wrong, that he should have said that there will be a peaceful transfer of power. I'll be waiting to see what Republicans say about this.
You've also talked in terms of the importance to you of electing Joe Biden, of not reelecting Donald Trump, about getting William Barr out of the Attorney General's office. As the prominent Attorney General to follow you, what is your view of his conduct in office?
I started my career in the Justice Department back in 1976. I served under Republican as well as Democratic attorneys general, as just a line lawyer, the lowest lawyer position in the Justice Department, and I was proud of being a part of the Justice Department. Didn't always agree with the policy positions that some of the attorney generals took, but I always had respect for them. Barr, by contrast, again, ignores the norms of the Justice Department. Attorneys general are supposed to serve the people, not the president. I think he sees himself as the president's lawyer as opposed to the people's lawyer. He injects himself into cases that are going to help his client, the president. He has come up with positions, again, inconsistent with what attorneys general have done before. He's made statements about our society and parts of our society deploying, troops or federal forces in Portland and in Washington, D.C. to get at peaceful protesters. He's done things with the Mueller report, mischaracterized the Mueller report. There's a whole range of things that he has done. And that's why I have been as vocal as I have been about the need for him to be removed. And that's another thing that is at stake in this upcoming election.
Referring to your time having worked under presidents and administrations of both parties, and looking at the relationships between the last few administrations, I mean, seeing the Bush family and the Obama family able to come together for things like John Lewis's funeral or events that bring the country together. We don't see that out of the current administration. Do you think that this is an insurmountable break in our tradition in terms of the ability for people to get along across the aisle, to look at the nation above partisan goals, or do you think that we can come back from where we are right now?
I'm a pretty optimistic person by nature, and I'm cautiously optimistic here. I think that we can hope that what we've seen over the course of these last 4 years will be an aberration, that we can get back to, we are a loud nation, and we fight like hell. But at the end of the fight, we have always found a way to get together. I think the example that you shared was a good one. The relationship that exists between the Bush family, the Obama family, I think is instructive and is a good example of the way in which this nation should and must again come together. So I think that we can do it. It's not going to be easy, given the leadership that Donald Trump. The way in which he's used his leadership of the nation. And I'm not sure that he will, in his post-presidency, which I hope begins in January, will be, as other ex-presidents have been, somebody who tries to bring the nation together. I can hope, but I don't have much hope about him. I hope his supporters will understand that the era of Trump, or the time of Trump, would be over, and it would be time to get back to a more normal existence for this nation.
Turning into focus here on Wisconsin, obviously close to my heart, having grown up here, but it's become important to you, and not just because your daughter went to school here. Right. Why did you start to get involved in the various fights here in Wisconsin, and what are you looking at going forward?
Well, I'm the head of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, and one of the things that we are trying to fight is the process of gerrymandering. We want to make sure that the redistricting that is done in 2021 is done in a fair way. Don't want to gerrymander for Democrats. I only want to have a fair process. And Wisconsin is almost like the poster child of gerrymandering in America. For the past decade, we've seen Democrats win more votes for the legislature here, but fail to gain majority simply because of the way in which the lines were drawn. And so, I guess in the last election, Democrats won about 54% of the votes, have about a third of the seats in the legislature. And that has led to a state legislature that in no way, I think, reflects the people of your state. Instead, they do the bidding of the NRA and other, big business donors. And so we have had a nationwide program to attack gerrymandering wherever we have found it. We've been active in states other than Wisconsin, but there was always a question among us of what was the worst gerrymandered state, Wisconsin or North Carolina. We won some litigation victories in North Carolina that I think are going to unlock the state and make that state more fair. So I think, unfortunately, Wisconsin is probably now the most gerrymandered state in the nation. So that's what brought me to Wisconsin and has really underlined all of the efforts that I've made in the state.
It's a dubious honor for us to have, but it is. The districts here are quite interesting. So I guess I'm wondering if you could compare Wisconsin to other states. You say it's probably the worst gerrymandering, but what makes it so?
Well, I mean, just the way in which Republicans in the state are unapologetic, about the way in which they use their power. They have, consistently tried to do things that are more in sync with keeping them in power, as opposed to reflecting the interests of their constituents. Again, the way the lines are drawn, Democrats can get a majority of the votes and get only a third of the seats. You also see, the ways in which, again, thumbing their noses at the people. You saw those lines in the Wisconsin primaries. Governor Evers wanted to come up with a way in which people could vote safely during the course of the pandemic. And Republicans, because they wanted to make sure that they wanted to win a Supreme Court race, thought that they would make people actually come out of their homes and vote, thinking that that would somehow depress the vote. Didn't work. Jill Karofsky, in fact, was elected. But that's just an example of the power that they have, the misuse of that power, and their focus on their own interests as opposed to the interests of their constituents.
You mentioned Jill Karofsky. You've campaigned for a number of justices running for the Supreme Court here. You've also sued the former governor in regards to some elections issues here. What is the strategy, I guess, for your organization to fight gerrymandering here? It involves the courts, it involves elections. Why, I guess, where do all those puzzle pieces fit in?
Yeah, what we're trying to do is just come up with a system that's fair. If Democrats get over 50% of the seats, you would expect the Democrats would get 50% of the votes. You'd expect that they would get over 50% of the seats. And so what we're trying to do is just put in place systems that are fair. I mean, next week I'm going to be joining a meeting of the People's Map Commission that Governor Evers has set up, and I think what will come out of that effort will be some proposed maps that will in fact be fair, that will not discriminate against people in Milwaukee or in Madison, will not discriminate against people of color, will not discriminate against poor people or people who are perceived to be Democrats. And so we'll have a series of maps that come out of that effort that, again, will be by any objective measure fair. And we'll see what the Republicans will do when they are doing the redistricting next year and compare them to these fair maps. So what we're trying to do is at all levels, at the state legislative level, make sure that things are done in a fair way, make sure that a Supreme Court that considers questions around redistricting is fairly constituted and has people on the court that will keep in their minds the notion that they have to be guardians of a fair system in the state.
So this People's Map Commission is just getting started. What kind of conversations have you had with Governor Evers about your, what they might accomplish and how it might work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great idea that he came up with. Made the proposal formally to let's do something officially there. Republicans, I guess not unexpectedly said no, we're not going to do that. So putting together a commission where you bring people from around the state to be engaged in the process. Some will be experts. Some will be people who only want to have some sense of involvement and a fair outcome. I think this makes a great deal of sense, and I think the product of that effort will be something that the people of the state can compare and hold on to, and then look at what the Republicans do next year. And if there are discrepancies or if there is a great degree of unfairness, be able to ask the Republicans who put those maps together, why? Why, in fact, are you doing this? It won't happen in a vacuum, what they do in 2021. There'll be something for people to compare it to. And I think that will raise the level of desire on the part of people in Wisconsin to have a fair process. I mean, all the polls, that I've seen indicate that people want to have a fair process. People support the idea of a commission, not only in Wisconsin. We've seen it in Michigan, Colorado, Utah, Missouri, red states, blue states. People like the idea of taking the power away from interested politicians and giving it to a neutral body to draw fair lines. As a Democrat, that's all I'm asking for, a fair system. And I challenge the Republicans in Wisconsin to say that they will stand for the creation of a commission, a neutral body that would draw fair lines. Do they fear the people who they say they want to represent? Do they fear a fair system? Scott Walker says a lot of things. He never says that he will stand for a fair and neutral system or a fair and neutral commission to draw the lines. He wants to keep his finger on the scales.
You mentioned the support in polls, and yeah, it's overwhelming. At least 2/3, I believe 70% even of voters in Wisconsin in most polls will say that they do support the idea of nonpartisan redistricting or fair maps, depending on how it's worded. And yet we don't see necessarily a lot of movement. How do you take that support that exists and is widespread in theory and make it something that actually energizes and mobilizes people and makes it an issue that they consider when they're casting their ballot?
Well, one thing is that the politicians who will not stand for what the people want, that is a fair, neutral system of redistricting, they have to pay a political price. And so people need to get out and vote and make that an issue upon which they make their determination about who they're going to support. So if you have a politician who will not stand for a fair redistricting process, don't vote for that person. If you are a Republican and you've got a Republican, a Republican person who is running for a particular position, and that person in the state legislature won't stand for a fair system, don't vote for that person. It is if politicians understand that there's an electoral consequence to their not doing what the people want, then they will finally do what the people desire. The fact that there's been no progress on that in Wisconsin is an indication of how entrenched the Republican power system is in the state, and the unwillingness of Republican politicians to do that which their constituents want, because they know at base that if they do, it's going to reduce their numbers, it's going to reduce their power. Because in a fair system, you're not going to have nearly as many Republicans as you do now. Again, 54% of the vote goes for Democrats. Democrats get a third of the seats. That's fundamentally unfair. That is not American democracy at its best.
Even if Democrats have a really good year on the ballot in November, it's quite likely, in fact, probably almost certain, that Republicans are going to have control of the state legislature, at least one chamber, if not both, but likely both. So knowing that heading into the next redistricting period, which is coming up, we're going to have very likely a Republican legislature, Democratic governor, the set of maps created by the map commission from the governor, set of maps coming from the legislature. How does that process work out? Does it end in clash? Does it only go to the court?
Well, we'll see how it plays out. But the fact that we have Tony Evers as governor with veto power, and we need to protect his ability to veto any partisan and bad maps that the Republican legislature would send to him. If he vetoes it, and there is some interaction between the governor and the legislature to try to draw fair maps, maybe something works out in that way. If they are at an impasse, well, then you end up in court. And hopefully, the courts will draw maps that are fair. And what we will do at the National Democratic Redistricting Committee is look at the process and see if the process is fair, see if the outcome is an appropriate one, and then we'll consider our options, including litigation options that that we would have. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, in the short term, I think we need to put as many Democrats as we can into the legislature, and people who are committed to doing a fair map process. And then we'll see what happens. We have to save, as I said, Tony Evers' veto ability, just to make sure that he is a check on a Republican legislature that has shown itself to be committed to the retention of power above everything else.
I know you can't answer for every elected Democrat in the country or in any state legislature. I won't ask you to, but I think this comes up frequently because, in Wisconsin, the example that we have of bad redistricting, of heavily gerrymandered districts, is Republican control. But Democrats have had opportunities, have had majorities in the past to pass redistricting reform, and they generally haven't. Why do you think they didn't?
Yeah, and let me be clear here. When I'm talking about the bad redistricting that we're dealing with now is what Republicans did in 2011, which Princeton said was probably the worst gerrymandering of the past 50 years. But we've had gerrymandering in this country for almost as long as we have been a republic, and Democrats have gerrymandered as well. And I have stood against Democrats who would gerrymander. There's a Republican House seat in Maryland that I've said is inappropriate and should not be gerrymandered. Democrats in New Jersey wanted to use the power that they had there to do some inappropriate things with regard to redistricting. I stood against that. On the other hand, you look at Democrats in Virginia, who now control the governorship and both houses of the legislature there, and they have decided they're going to stand for the creation of an independent commission. And so, Democrats are giving up power in Virginia. But yeah, I stand against gerrymandering, whoever engages in it. I'm actually confident, and Democrats need to be confident, that in a fair system, Democrats and progressives will do just fine. We don't have to try to discriminate against people trying to vote. We don't need to make it more difficult for people to vote. We don't need to gerrymander. Let's just have a fair system all the way around, and Democrats will be just fine.
What are some examples of places that are doing it right, whether it's an entire state or parties in other states that have gotten something done on this?
Well, I think the states that have in place or have recently put in place these independent commissions are the ones that I think are doing it best. Arizona, California have had redistricting commissions in place for extended periods of time. As a result of the work of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, we have helped put in place redistricting commissions in Michigan, Missouri, Colorado, and Utah, red states and blue states. Whenever the people have the ability to decide through ballot initiatives whether or not they want to have it done, redistricting done by politicians or done by a redistricting commission, they always vote for a commission. So I think those 6 states are good examples of it. Iowa's got an interesting system where the redistricting is done by civil servants, just a part of the Iowa government, not done by politicians. I think the key really is to take it out of the hands of politicians and put it in the hands of people who are not interested in preserving their power. And so, there are other systems that are, better than Wisconsin's, not as good as independent commissions. But I think that the best way to do it is the way in which those 6 states do, and that is through the independent commissions.
Okay. We are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to talk more about redistricting, and we're going to go back to some more current events. So sit tight, we'll be right back.
Cap Times Idea Fest 2020 is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors. Presenting sponsor, the Burrish Group at UBS, a financial services firm with global access and a local focus to pursue what matters most for its clients. Major sponsors are HealthX Ventures, backing entrepreneurs who are creating value with digital health solutions. Exact Sciences, pursuing earlier detections and life-changing answers in the fight against cancer. Quartz, health plans built with you in mind. And Madison Gas and Electric, your community energy company whose goal is net zero carbon electricity by 2050. Co-sponsors are Epic Systems and the Godfrey Kahn Law Firm. Other sponsors are Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, Home Savings Bank, Unity Point Health Meritor, Cargo Coffee, and the Forward Theater Company. Media partners are the Wisconsin State Journal and Madison.com. WKOW Channel 27, and Hinckley Productions. Please consider becoming a Cap Times member. Learn more at membership.captimes.com.
So looking at those nonpartisan redistricting commissions, however they may be made up, when we talk to opponents of redistricting reform, the Republicans in the legislature here, they say it's not possible for any commission to truly be nonpartisan, that everyone involved is going to have their own interests and that they can't put those aside. What would you say to that criticism?
That's nonsense. That is utter nonsense. The commissions are made up in different ways around the country. Some have 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and 4 independents. And there are ways in which you can test to make sure that the independents are, in fact, independent. Some have retired judges on them. That is utter nonsense. What they're trying to do is simply avoid having things done in a fair way that they think will result in their loss of power. Believe me, you can look at these independent commissions around the country. The people in the states where they exist are satisfied with them. The results that they put out are in fact neutral and respected by people, and it has a very positive impact on the systems. If you don't have gerrymandering, where people are in these safe seats, politicians have to be responsive to the wishes of the people that they represent. Gerrymandering really kind of creates a system where it's not in the best interest of a politician in a safe seat to work with people across the aisle. If you're in a safe seat, you're only concerned about a primary as opposed to a general election. And if you're seen as cooperating too much with your political opponents, with people on the other side of the aisle, that is seen as a sign of weakness. And that leads to the gridlock that we see, the extremism that we see. We talked earlier about getting back to a more sane, a more cooperative America. Gerrymandering is one of the things that prevents that from happening. And the creation of these commissions really helps lower the temperature and helps ultimately to lead to bipartisan cooperation when it comes to legislative matters. But the notion that somehow, some way, commissions are not good things is just nonsense. It is just, people need to see that for what it is. It's simply a way for people who are critical of them to retain power. That's all it is.
Wisconsin has been among several states that have seen their redistricting, seen their maps go through litigation over the last few years. We've had a lot of voting-related litigation in Wisconsin in particular, but I want to first ask about the Supreme Court's decision in Gill versus Whitford, the case that came out of Wisconsin, which basically kind of left us with a big shrugged shoulders approach. And I know that courts are often reluctant to weigh in on maps like this, but what was your analysis of the court's decision on Gill versus Whitford?
Well, that was really kind of a punt. I mean, the decision that ultimately the court rendered in Ruchko decision, where the court said that with regard to partisan gerrymandering, these are not cases that should be heard by the federal courts. I think it's probably one of the worst decisions that we have seen by a Supreme Court. It's part of what I consider a bad three cases by the court. One, Citizens United, that let in unrestricted amounts of money into the system. The Shelby County case, which gutted the Voting Rights Act, and the Ruchko case, which said that federal courts are not open to partisan gerrymandering. I think the court made serious mistakes there and really is not protecting our electoral system in a way that it should. It allows those three decisions allow the special interests to have way more power than they should, and minimizes the impact of the effect that the people can have. So I think that you have to look at all of those cases together, and it's one of the reasons why I'm concerned about who the successor to Justice Ginsburg will be, because I think those three decisions need to be, if not reconsidered, they certainly need to be modified in such a way that their negative impacts can be dialed down.
Why do you think it is that courts have been so reluctant to offer any sort of relief or to wade into these redistricting fights? And I assume you think that they probably should, but why should they if they should?
Well, I think the partisan gerrymandering cases are pretty instructive. At the trial court level, at the appellate court level, judges were quite willing to weigh in and say that what they saw in the cases that were before them in Maryland, in Wisconsin, North Carolina, that these cases were cases that they should hear, and that the systems that were in place violated the federal Constitution. It's only the Supreme Court that said that these were not cases that should be heard by the federal courts. And again, that shows what happens when you've got an ideologically driven Supreme Court, and ideologically driven 5 members on the court who have the ability to say, unlike every other judge who considered those matters, they have the ability to say these are not cases that the federal courts should hear. If you put yet another ideologically driven judge on the court, you then have a 6-3 majority, and the chances of getting, good non-ideological decisions on a whole range of things becomes less and less possible.
Do you ever feel like you're Sisyphus throughout this process? I mean, you're pushing a boulder up a hill, trying to elect people who will actually pass laws to change the redistricting process. However, as long as the people who are in power, eventually we're going to get to a point where they might get to draw more maps. I mean, this has to feel just sort of frustrating after a while, right?
Well, Wisconsin's a little frustrating. We've tried there a number of things, and we've had, medium amounts of success. Certainly done well with regard to putting fair, neutral judges, I think, on the Supreme Court. We'll see what happens with regard to the process here in Wisconsin. Tony Evers was elected with our support, and he'll play a big part in the redistricting process next year. But we've had successes around the country. In North Carolina, we won litigation victories that really unlocked the maps in North Carolina. We have changed. We won litigation in Virginia, and the process there is now a fair one. We've put these independent commissions in those 4 states that I mentioned. We have elected candidates who will stand for fair redistricting. One of the things that we demand of any candidate who we support is that they sign a fair redistricting pledge. And so we have people all around the country who we have elected since we started back in January of 2017 who have pledged to stand for a fair redistricting process in 2021. So, I don't want everybody to think that, Wisconsin is typical. As I said, Wisconsin is the most gerrymandered state in the country. What's going on in other parts of the country is a pretty strong wave of reform when it comes to redistricting. And what we saw in 2011 with that Republican gerrymandering, I don't think is going to be replicated in 2021. So I don't quite feel like Sisyphus. I feel like we've had, more than a fair amount of success.
All right. So we're just the outlier here.
Yeah, unfortunately, a bit of an aberration and certainly an outlier. But I'm still hopeful that we're going to be able to bring reform to Wisconsin and a more fair system to the citizens of this great state.
And it's not just redistricting. There are a number of different changes to voting rights laws and access to the polls that have an effect on our elections and on people's ability to have their voices heard. And Wisconsin has seen a number of those changes, particularly over the last decade under Republican Governor Scott Walker, the Republican legislature. What stands out to you as some of the, most harmful things that states have done, that Wisconsin has done in terms of just ballot access in general?
Well, these unnecessary photo ID laws, supposedly to prevent in-person voter fraud. The Brennan Center has done a study and says, you're more likely to be struck by lightning than to cast an in-person fraudulent ballot. It really is an attempt to keep people away from the polls or to make it more difficult for certain people to vote, people of color, poor people who are perceived to be Democrats. For the past decade, your gerrymandered legislature and, Scott Walker came up with a system that attacked unions, gutted funding for your education system. Again, as I said, passed that discriminatory voter ID law, tried repeatedly to cut back early voting in Madison and in Milwaukee. And think about it, even after Walker was beat in 2018 by Tony Evers, the Republican gerrymandered legislature went into a lame duck session to gut the power of the incoming governor, the incoming attorney general, even before they took office. So there's a whole range of things this gerrymandered state, gerrymandered Republican legislature has done. Not the least of which is to make it difficult for people to vote. And again, I keep coming back to the point about what is it that they fear? Why are they afraid of the people who they say they want to represent? If you can't win a majority of the votes with the policies that you have, change the policies. That's kind of the way we do it in the United States. They are comfortable, it seems, with being a minority party that has majority power. And that's inconsistent with the American way.
So in a state like Wisconsin, if you weren't working on redistricting, or in addition to redistricting, what would be the first things that you would target to try to make elections more accessible, more fair here?
Well, I think I would undo those unnecessary voter ID laws. Making sure that people have these unnecessary photo IDs. I think that is something that is clearly just an attempt to keep certain people away from the polls or make it more difficult for people to vote. I certainly think in this year, I'd want to make sure that we have a system that allows people to cast a vote by mail as easy and efficient as you possibly can. I mean, people are making a very logical decision. They don't want to go out and expose themselves to the virus, be in the middle of a pandemic, simply trying to do their civic duty. I mean, that picture is burned in my mind. That woman I think it was in Milwaukee, in Wisconsin, holding up that sign that said, "This is ridiculous," and that long line of people behind her waiting to cast a ballot in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, this doesn't make any sense. So, voting by mail, doing away with unnecessary photo ID laws, to the extent that polls, rolls have been purged. And we see again that the people who get purged are disproportionately people who are going to tend to vote Democratic. These are all the kinds of things that that I would try to undo.
At the federal level, what does it do when the president says things like vote twice or don't trust the Postal Service, don't vote by mail?
I mean, he's trying to delegitimize an election that he thinks he is going to lose. It shakes people's confidence in our electoral system. And so much of what it is that we do as a nation is based on people's belief in, confidence in the systems that govern us. And he's doing great damage to that system in the interest of himself. And it's something that I think we all have to push back against, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. I would hope that your allegiance is first to the nation and only second to a party. So, when President Trump says those kinds of things, it does great damage to the American system, damage that I hope will be repaired with the election of Joe Biden and hopefully over time, the coming together of this great nation.
How do you think we might, the challenge of the next administration is to restore that confidence and give people faith in the system. How do you think a president ought to go about that?
Well, I think you reach out to people on the other side. I think that's one of the strengths I think that Joe Biden has. He's been a person who's been known over the years to, reach across the aisle. He has friendships with people across the aisle. The fact that he saw Cindy McCain endorsing him. He was a good friend of John McCain. He has a good number of friends who are Republicans. And instead of trying to, demonize people on the other side of the aisle, I think it is in his nature to try to reach across the aisle. And hopefully, as he does that, that will have a collateral impact, and other people will do that as well. But I'm not naive. I mean, this is going to take time. The impact of this president, that is a President Trump, is going to be felt for many years after he's actually gone. Trump may be gone, but Trumpism and all the negatives that flow from it are things that we're going to have to be dealing with. But they're not insurmountable problems. We have faced difficult times in this nation, and we have overcome them. We have made the nation better. I'm actually confident that we can do so again if we have the will to do it. And I think Joe Biden is a person who does have that will.
I want to move away from voting and elections for a moment to talk about some difficult times that we are having. In Wisconsin, Jacob Blake was shot, a black man in Kenosha, 7 times in the back by a police officer. That investigation is still ongoing, but that follows, event after event after event that turns the nation's consciousness toward this. You, when you were Attorney General, visited Ferguson after Michael Brown was shot. Why are we still here, and what do we do?
Yeah, that's a tough question. We're here because we as a nation, I think for too long, have avoided tough questions around race. We for too long have done the necessary things to deal with systemic racism. We for too long have, turned our eyes from problems in our criminal justice system. It's only when we are confronted as a nation with visual proof that the nation has tended to respond. We certainly did that when we saw the open casket of Emmett Till that led to the beginnings of the civil rights movement. We did it when we saw John Lewis getting his skull cracked on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in 1965, led to all kinds of voting rights legislation. When we saw George Floyd Ahmaud Arbery, Mr. Blake. When we see those things, the American people have been moved, I think, to action. And so I think there's no question that we have a moment now. My hope is that we will use this this moment to come up with a movement that will bring in needed change. But we have, as I said, for too long, and I understand it. Having conversations about race are painful. They're not easy. They're awkward. But they're necessary if we want to get to a better place. We need to have the conversations, and then we need to do concrete things to make this nation more race neutral. We're not there. We're still not at a place where we can say that we are race neutral. Race still matters in this country. Systemic racism exists in this nation.
There's a lot of pain behind that, and we've seen that borne out in protests in Wisconsin, in Minneapolis, throughout the country. And we've seen the president take those and turn this into a narrative about law and order and destruction. How do you respond when he turns the conversation in that direction?
Well, he tries to posit the notion that somehow or other, public safety is inconsistent with a fair criminal justice system. And I say that they are not in tension. That you can have people treated fairly. You can have a justice system that is in fact just, and you can keep people safe at the same time. There is a lack of trust that exists now between communities of color and people in law enforcement who are supposed to serve them. That trust needs to be, built back. It's certainly something I tried to do when I was Attorney General. This president is trying to take these differences that exist, this lack of trust that exists, these racial differences that exist, and try to exploit them to divide the American people, so that he thinks it will benefit him politically. And this is in some ways, I think this is Trump at his worst, exacerbating instead of trying to heal the nation, exacerbating racial issues instead of trying to heal the nation around racial problems. This is exactly what you'd expect a president to do. That is to be a healer, not a divider. And so there are a whole bunch of reasons why I don't think Donald Trump should get another 4 years in office. But boy, this is really right near the top. His inability to see beyond his own political self-interest and to give in to the race-based stuff, the race baiting that he does. It's inexcusable. It's just inexcusable.
What should the next administration do to start these conversations about, I guess, assuming the next administration is not a Trump administration, to take advantage of this moment to further conversations about race, to really make progress as a country?
Well, I think that, there's some very concrete things that can be done. With regard to criminal justice, there is a bill that was passed by the House of Representatives. It's sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. A new president, hopefully with a new Democratic Senate, can take up that bill, pass it, and put in place the police reforms that are contained in that bill. That would go a long way, I think, to helping the situation. But I think the president can also serve as a healer. And starting up a dialogue, putting people together to talk about race, to make sure that his Justice Department, as Joe Biden's Justice Department, is using all of its tools to, again, heal the nation, so that we're looking at race problems, not only in the criminal justice system, but also with regard to education, housing. Again, these systems where we see racism still present. If we did everything right in the criminal justice system and made that fair, that would be a very substantial achievement. But it wouldn't be enough. We still have racial problems when it comes to, as I said, education, housing, our economic system. So, I think we need to look at the totality of American society and determine how is it that we are finally going to get to the place where we are going to come up with measures that attack these problems and put this nation in the place where it should be.
Not knowing who Joe Biden would select as Attorney General, and obviously not knowing whether he will win, assuming that he does and he has someone who would want your advice, what would your advice be to the next Attorney General?
To not shrink from fights, to understand that you have really substantial amounts of power. You have a limited amount of time in which to use that power, and to make sure that you are always leading. Don't and start from day one as quickly as you can to push back against the forces that want to take us back, forces that want to perpetuate injustice, forces that want to keep the American system unfair. Don't be hesitant to attack problems and be attacked, for being a fighter for justice, to have a more fair electoral system, to protect the right to vote. To use the power of the Justice Department to bring lawsuits where we see educational systems in the states that don't work. There's a whole range of things that the Justice Department can do with regard to race that I think an attorney general should do, but also with regard to having a more fair economic system when it comes to, antitrust. There's an environmental natural resources division within the Justice Department. Reinvigorate that division so that the Justice Department and the administration are pushing towards a better climate. So we don't see the things that we're seeing now. With ice melting in the north and south poles, wildfires in the west, hurricanes, untold numbers of hurricanes all over the place. We're in the middle of climate change now. So there's a whole range of things that an attorney general can have an impact on.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of this conversation has been about some really dark and heavy things, but you mentioned you are an optimist. You've got some hope to offer. What would you say to people who are feeling disillusioned, beat down, exhausted, like their vote doesn't matter? What message would you give them to fire them up?
Well, if you think that your vote doesn't matter, you think about all the ways in which people are trying to make it more difficult for you to vote, make it more difficult for your vote to count. The people on the other side understand that your vote, in fact, does matter. And people died, people sacrificed, people committed themselves so that you would, in fact, have the right to vote. So you don't not only have a responsibility to vote, you also have a duty to people who sacrificed so much. Indeed, some gave their lives so that you would indeed have the right to vote. It is the responsibility of every American to be a part of the system. I think we undervalue the power that we have as regular citizens. And yet when we are galvanized, when we are involved, when we participate, we change the course of this nation. The civil rights movement was successful not because segregation's time was up. It was because ordinary people got together and demanded that segregation be ended. The Vietnam War ended not because the United States had met all of its military objectives. It ended because there was not popular support for that war. People, again, were energized, were focused. And so we need to have a reawakening, a re-engagement of the American people in this early part of the 21st century. And if we do that, we can influence the direction of this nation. And it all starts with an individual vote. So I don't want to hear that. That, let me just say, that pisses me off. The notion that somehow, some way, your vote doesn't matter, that you're not going to be engaged, because you're telling me then that John Lewis got his skull cracked on the Edmund Pettus Bridge for nothing, that Viola Liuzzo died for nothing, that those 3 civil rights workers died in Mississippi in 1963 for nothing. You owe them. It's a duty for people to vote.
With that, we're drawing close to the end here. What's at stake on the ballot here in Wisconsin? What's your message for Wisconsin voters?
What's on the ballot is, what kind of Wisconsin do you want to have? What kind of state do you want to have? Do you want to have a government that is responsive to the people, or do you want to have a government that is responsive only to the special interests? You've lived for the last decade with an administration that is in the pockets of the NRA, the special interest that has attacked the rights of unions and union workers in the state, that has put in place an unfair electoral system. It's time for Wisconsin to get back to its progressive roots. This is the state of La Follette. This is the state that has led the nation when it has come to reform in so many areas. We can't allow to have happen over the past decade which is try to take Wisconsin back. I mean, it is time to put Wisconsin on the forefront of the reform that I think is really happening around the country. I think we're at the beginning of a new progressive era. And if Wisconsin is going to be true to its history, Wisconsin should be a leader in that regard. And so I think the way that that happens is for people in this state to demand of their leaders a fair system, to participate in the process by voting, by supporting the maps that will come out of the People's Map Commission, and demand that those maps look like what comes out of that neutral body. You know, just because things have been this way for the past 10 years doesn't mean they have to be that way forever. Change is possible, but it is not promised. It only happens when people commit themselves to it and work for it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, taking the time to talk about this. Hope that we can see you in person someday, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys do in Wisconsin in the next few, 40-some days now toward the election? Yeah.
40-something days, and then I get to rest, but not before then. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to seeing you in Madison, Milwaukee, or someplace in that wonderful state, and sometime soon, I hope.
Excellent. Take care.
Take care now.
Cap Times Idea Fest 2020 is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors. Presenting sponsor, the Burrish Group at UBS, a financial services firm with global access and a local focus to pursue what matters most for its clients. Major sponsors are HealthX Ventures, backing entrepreneurs who are creating value with digital health solutions. Exact Sciences, pursuing earlier detections and life-changing answers in the fight against cancer. Quartz, health plans built with you in mind. And Madison Gas and Electric, your community energy company whose goal is net zero carbon electricity by 2050. Co-sponsors are Epic Systems and the Godfrey Kahn Law Firm. Other sponsors are Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, Home Savings Bank, Unity Point Health Meritor, Cargo Coffee, and the Forward Theater Company. Media partners are the Wisconsin State Journal and Madison.com, WKOW Channel 27, and Hinckley Productions. Please consider becoming a Cap Times member. Learn more at membership.captimes.com.